While I was fighting for my life in a hospital bed, with both of my kidneys failing and doctors demanding an immediate transplant, my parents showed up not to comfort me, but to demand that I hand over my $250,000 life savings to my deadbeat brother. When I flatly refused, my own mother ripped the heavy blood pressure monitor off the wall and smashed it into my head. They honestly believed that in my weakest state, I would break and give in. But what I did to my family next, they never saw coming. The truth behind my story is brutal, but before I begin, please drop your location and local time in the comments below. I truly want to see where in the world my voice is echoing right now, and from how many different places you all are joining me in this fight for justice. My name is Chloe. I am a 32-year-old financial analyst living and working in the relentless, fast-paced heart of New York City. For as long as I can remember, I believed that blood was thicker than water, and that family was something you protected at all costs, even if it meant sacrificing your own dreams, your own health, and your own sanity. I grew up in a household where my worth was measured solely by what I could provide. If I achieved something, it wasn't a moment of celebration, it was simply another asset for my family to utilize. Living in an expensive city like New York demands every ounce of your energy, especially when you are climbing the corporate ladder at a high-intensity financial firm. My days began at 5 a.m. under the cold, gray city sky and rarely ended before 9 p.m. While my peers spent their weekends traveling, socializing, or investing in their own futures, my weekends were consumed by balancing spreadsheets, calculating bills, and managing the endless demands of the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I was a devoted daughter. I was the reliable sister. I was the person everyone called when a crisis struck, because they knew I would fix it, no matter the personal cost. When you spend your entire life being the emotional and financial anchor for an entire household, you become conditioned to ignore your own exhaustion. You normalize the constant headaches, the overwhelming fatigue, and the deep, hollow ache of being entirely unappreciated. I convinced myself that if I just worked a little harder, if I just earned a little more, I would finally earn the respect and love I so desperately craved from my parents. But innocence is a fragile thing, and mine was about to be brutally shattered by the very people I was killing myself to support. For 5 long, exhausting years, I was the sole financial engine keeping my family from total collapse. I wasn't just helping out with groceries or tossing a few dollars toward the electric bill. I was carrying the entire weight of their existence on my shoulders. Every single month, the premium mortgage payment on our family home in New York came directly out of my checking account. I paid for the water, the high-speed internet, the gas, and the filled refrigerator they all took for granted. But my heaviest financial burden wasn't the house, it was my younger brother, Austin. Austin is 26 years old, and he is the undisputed golden child of our family. He is a textbook narcissist, a completely ungrateful, arrogant man-child who has never held a job for more than 3 consecutive weeks. Every time he was fired or walked out of a position because someone looked at him wrong, my mother, Brenda, and my father, Arthur, would coddle him. They spent years convincing him that he was far too special, far too brilliant for ordinary labor. According to them, the world just didn't understand Austin's genius. If a boss corrected his work, Brenda would claim they were just jealous of his potential. If he failed to show up for a shift, Arthur would blame the company's toxic work culture. They insulated him from every single consequence of his laziness, creating a monster who truly believed the world owed him a premium lifestyle. So, while Austin spent his days sleeping in past noon, playing video games, and driving around town spending money he didn't earn, I was putting in brutal, soul-crushing 80-hour work weeks at my firm. I became a ghost in my own life. I skipped meals to hit deadlines, slept under my office desk during heavy market weeks, and ignored the persistent, dull ache in my lower back that never seemed to go away. My social life became entirely non-existent. When friends invited me out, I had to refuse because my salary was already earmarked for Austin's car insurance, my parents' medical prescriptions, and the ever-increasing utility bills at home. While Brenda, Arthur, and Austin lived comfortably off my grueling labor, I practiced extreme discipline with my own personal money. I didn't buy designer clothes, I didn't go on luxury vacations, and I drove a modest beat-up car that I parked blocks away from my office to save on garage fees. I had a secret goal that kept me pushing through the exhaustion. Over those 5 years, through sheer willpower, tight budgeting, and sacrificing every single personal comfort, I managed to quietly accumulate exactly $250,000 in a private personal savings account. That $250,000 was my lifeline. It was a sacred fund that I hoped to eventually use to place a down payment on a beautiful, quiet apartment of my own. A ticket to finally step out of their suffocating, ungrateful shadow and build a real life. They had no idea this money existed. I kept the statements electronic and sent them to a secure private email address that required two-factor authentication. I knew that if they ever found out about my savings, they would find a way to guilt, manipulate, or pressure me into giving it up for Austin's endless whims. I assumed as long as I kept paying their bills and keeping them comfortable, they would leave me alone. I didn't realize that to them, I wasn't a daughter or a sister at all. I was just an ATM with a pulse, and the moment that ATM showed a single sign of breaking down, they were ready to smash it to pieces. I was burning myself alive to keep them warm, completely blind to the fact that they wouldn't hesitate to throw me into the fire the second my fuel ran out. The absolute breaking point arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning at my office. I was sitting at my desk analyzing market trends on my monitors when a sudden, blinding headache hit me. It wasn't a normal headache. It felt like a physical spike being driven through my temples. The chronic exhaustion I had foolishly dismissed for months as simple corporate burnout finally caught up to me all at once. My vision began to blur into a terrifying dark haze. My chest tightened until I could barely gasp for air, and the entire trading floor started spinning violently. I tried to reach for my phone to call out to a colleague at the next desk, but my arm felt like lead. My knees buckled completely, and I collapsed flat on the carpet, slipping into total darkness as the sounds of shouting coworkers faded away. When I finally opened my heavy, swollen eyes, the bright fluorescent lights of a sterile hospital room at a major Manhattan medical center blinded me. I tried to move, but a heavy oxygen mask was strapped tightly over my face. A steady stream of fluids was dripping into my left arm through multiple IV lines, and a rhythmic heart monitor beeped faintly beside my head. Every muscle in my body ached, and a profound, hollow weakness made it impossible to even sit up. A doctor in blue scrubs walked into the room, holding a medical clipboard with an incredibly grim expression on his face. He sat down by my bed, sighed heavily, and delivered a diagnosis that completely paralyzed me with fear. Both of my kidneys were failing rapidly. He explained that my body was shutting down from toxic overload due to severe, undetected chronic renal failure. I required immediate, aggressive medical intervention, continuous dialysis, and an eventual kidney transplant if I wanted any chance of surviving. Terrified, completely overwhelmed, and weeping uncontrollably beneath my plastic mask, my first instinct was to reach for my phone on the bedside table and call my mother, Brenda. I was a child facing death. I needed comfort. I needed my family to tell me that they would be there, that we would fight this together. But the moment I explained the severe diagnosis to her through my shaking tears, the phone line went deathly quiet for a brief, chilling second. Then, Brenda exploded into pure, unadulterated rage. There was no pity, no concern, no maternal love. She screamed through the speaker so loudly that the nurse adjusting my IV turned around in shock. "How could you do this to us? You are so incredibly selfish, Chloe. If you lose your job and end up bedridden in a hospital, who is going to pay our mortgage next month? Who is going to cover Austin's car payments and bills? Have you thought about your brother at all? You are completely useless to this family now." Before I could even choke out a response through my sobbing, she slammed the phone down, cutting the line. I stared at the blank screen, my chest heaving, waiting for a call back. It never came. Within the hour, I discovered that Brenda and Arthur had completely blocked my phone number. They totally abandoned me in that cold, sterile hospital room. Days slowly bled into weeks, and not a single member of my family showed up to check if I was dead or alive. I faced my darkest hours entirely alone, listening to the monotonous hum of medical machines, realizing with absolute certainty that my life only mattered to them as long as I was a functioning paycheck. The people I had built my life around looked at my failing body and saw nothing but a broken utility that was no longer serving its purpose. The initial crushing weight of that abandonment was an agonizing pill to swallow, but as the days crawled by, the tears stopped. Lying under those harsh fluorescent lights, watching the clear fluid slowly drip into my IV line, a cold, unyielding clarity took over my mind. The blind, unconditional loyalty I had practiced for years was officially dead. Being the selfless, accommodating daughter had nearly killed me, and I vowed right then that if I survived this illness, my life would never belong to them again. I pulled up my banking application on my phone, stared at my untouched $250,000 balance, and whispered to myself that this money would buy my freedom. But my family wasn't done showing their true colors. 3 weeks into my hospital stay, the door to my private room swung open. For a split second, a foolish, naive part of my heart hoped they were there to apologize. But the expressions on Brenda and Arthur's faces weren't filled with regret. They were fueled by sheer desperation and greed. They hadn't brought flowers or a card. Instead, Brenda marched straight to the edge of my bed and slammed a stack of official notarized legal wire transfer documents onto my lap. "Sign them, Chloe." "Now," Brenda demanded, her voice dripping with ice. I looked down at the paperwork, my hands trembling slightly. "What is this?" "Don't play dumb with us," my father, Arthur, snapped, stepping up right behind her like a loyal guard dog. "Austin found your financial statements in the mail. You've been hoarding $250,000 while your brother is struggling to start his life. He needs that exact $250,000 to launch his luxury clothing brand. You're stuck in this bed, and let's face it, you're probably never going back to work. You don't need this money anymore. Sign it over to your brother so someone in this family actually has a future." I stared at my own parents, utterly repulsed. "This is my life savings," I whispered, my voice growing stronger with every word. "Both of my kidneys are failing. I am fighting for my life, and you want me to hand over my $250,000 life savings to my deadbeat brother so he can play dress up? No, I am not signing a single thing. Get out of my room." Brenda's face contorted into a mask of pure, demonic rage. "You ungrateful, selfish little brat!" she shrieked. Before I could even realize what was happening, her hand flew to the medical equipment mounted beside my bed. With a violent, crazed jerk, she ripped the heavy, solid blood pressure monitor straight off the hospital wall, tearing the wires loose. She raised it high above her head and brought it crashing down directly into my skull. A sharp, blinding explosion of pain rocketed through my head. I screamed as the impact shattered my skin, and the room began to spin. "Brenda, stop!" I cried out, clutching my head as the room blurred into a horrific haze. I looked toward my father, pleading with my eyes for him to protect me, but Arthur didn't move a single inch to help his injured daughter. Instead, he coldly stepped forward, blocked the window of the hospital door to hide the view from the busy hallway, and looked down at me with complete contempt. "You brought this on yourself, Chloe," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm, backing up Brenda completely. "You always were a stubborn, selfish girl. You think you're better than this family? Your mother is right. You're doing nothing but being difficult." Brenda raised the heavy monitor to strike my head a second time, but she didn't get the chance. What my parents didn't realize in their arrogant, greedy frenzy was that the moment they had started shouting, my hand had already crept beneath my pillow. I had kept my finger pressed firmly against the hospital's emergency panic button. They honestly believed that in my weakest state, I would break and give in. But they had no idea what was coming next. The heavy double doors of my hospital room burst open with a loud thud as 3 muscular hospital security guards and the head charge nurse flooded into the space. Brenda froze, the heavy medical blood pressure monitor still gripped firmly in her trembling, crazed hands. Before she or Arthur could even attempt to craft a lie, the security team pinned them both against the wall, neutralizing the threat immediately. The nurse rushed to my side, applying heavy, sterile gauze to my forehead to stop the sharp pain while dialing 911 on her direct line. Within 7 minutes, the sharp, wailing sirens of the New York Police Department echoed outside. 2 armed officers marched into my room, taking in the horrific scene, the shattered medical equipment, the chaotic hospital sheets, and my parents being held down by security. Arthur immediately tried to smooth things over, raising his hands and saying, "Officer, this is just a private family dispute. Our daughter is mentally unstable due to her medication." But I wasn't going to let them twist the narrative. Through the pain, I pointed a shaking finger directly at the small black dome lens mounted in the upper corner of the ceiling. "Check the internal safety camera," I rasped out to the lead officer. "It's a mandatory medical recording. It captured everything." The officers immediately reviewed the high-definition footage at the nurse's station. The video evidence was damning and unarguable. It showed my mother tearing down the monitor and brutally striking a bedridden, defenseless kidney patient, and it showed my father actively acting as a lookout, completely supporting the violence. The officers returned to the room with heavy steel handcuffs. Right there in the bright public corridor of the hospital, Brenda was slapped with charges of second-degree felony assault and domestic violence in a medical facility. Arthur was handcuffed right next to her, charged as a direct accomplice to felony assault. As they were marched down the hallway in chains, surrounded by staring doctors and visitors, Brenda shrieked back at me, cursing my name. I just watched them go, my face completely expressionless. While they sat in a cold holding cell at the precinct awaiting their formal arraignment, I began the cold, calculated execution of my financial retaliation. My parents had assumed that my medical crisis would completely drain my resources, leaving me vulnerable enough to be stripped of my assets. What their profound ignorance kept them from realizing was that as a top-tier financial analyst, my firm provided me with an elite, premium corporate health insurance policy. The moment I was admitted, the insurance company had already approved 100% coverage for my specialized treatments, continuous dialysis, and the upcoming transplant surgery. Not a single cent of my personal money was required to save my life. My $250,000 savings account was entirely, perfectly untouched. With a steady hand, I grabbed my laptop from the hospital bedside table and logged into my primary banking portal. For 5 years, I had willingly kept the automated transfers active. With 3 deliberate clicks, I permanently deactivated the recurring mortgage payments for the family home. I canceled the automated utility accounts, cut off the shared credit cards Austin used for his daily lifestyle, and blocked their access to my cell phone plan. Next, I fired off an urgent email to my real estate attorney, instructing him to notify the lender that I was walking away from the property entirely. I was letting the house go into immediate foreclosure. If my family wanted a roof over their heads, they were going to have to pay for it themselves with money they didn't have. 6 months later, the final day of reckoning arrived inside a cold, wood-paneled New York State courtroom. I stood at the civilian podium, breathing easily, feeling completely re-energized and healthy. Thanks to my premium insurance, my kidney transplant operation had been a flawless success, and my body was fully healed. I looked across the aisle to the defense table where Brenda and Arthur sat. The transformation was staggering. Gone were the arrogant, controlling parents who had treated me like property. They were slumped over, dressed in matching orange Department of Corrections jumpsuits, their hands shackled to their waists. When the judge took the bench, he didn't waste any time. The high-definition hospital security footage was played on the courtroom screens. Watching a mother violently assault her bedridden, sick daughter while the father actively acted as a lookout was too much for the court to bear. The judge looked down at them with visible disgust, stating that their actions were a subversion of parental duty and basic human decency. Brenda was sentenced to 4 years of mandatory time in a state penitentiary for second-degree felony assault and domestic violence. Arthur was handed 1 full year in county jail for his active complicity, along with a maximum $10,000 fine that completely wiped out their remaining liquid cash. But their legal punishment was only half of the karma they had coming. The real devastation was happening back on the streets. The moment I permanently deactivated the automated transfers from my hospital bed, The house of cards they lived in collapsed. Without my corporate salary covering the monthly mortgage, the lender wasted no time. The house went into immediate foreclosure, and a city marshal showed up to post the eviction notice on the front door. My golden child brother, Austin, discovered the hard way that the real world doesn't care about a mother's enabling praise. With the shared credit cards canceled, his phone line cut off, and the house stripped away, he was completely stranded. He was forced to trade his expensive designer clothes for a grease-stained apron, taking a minimum wage job washing dishes and clearing tables at a local diner just to afford a cramped shared room in an outer borough. The boy who was too special to work now spends his nights scrubbing floors, surviving on leftover scraps. I stood outside the courthouse steps, watching the correction vans pull away, and for the first time in 32 years, a profound, beautiful silence filled my chest. I didn't shed a single tear for them. I turned my back on their memory, hailed a cab, and drove to my brand new apartment, a sunlit, gorgeous space overlooking the New York skyline, paid for entirely by my untouched $250,000 savings. My life, my money, and my future finally belong entirely to me. Looking back at everything I went through, I realized that some people will only love you as long as you can be used. It took losing my health and almost my life to finally see that toxic blood is no different than poison. But justice has a beautiful way of balancing the scales, and today I am completely free. Now that you've heard my journey, I have to ask, do you think I did the right thing by letting the law and foreclosure completely break my family? What would you have done in my place? Let me know in the comments below. If you found value or strength in my story, please subscribe and hit the bell icon to join us daily. Thank you for listening, and stay strong.